Hey, we want to thank y'all for coming. It was really important. We've got a very useful program today that's going to help all of you navigate through the challenging times that are coming up. As you know, everything is going to be changing August 17th. However, before we get into that fun stuff, we have some very special people in our audience, and we would like to recognize them for their achievements. As you know, each year, EMTAR provides scholarships for our high school seniors who will be moving on to secondary education, whether that be a university or a trade school. This year, we were able to provide $8,500 through the Martin Cummings and Karen Lowe Scholarship Fund to our winning recipients. At this time, I would like to ask each of the scholarship recipients to come forward to be recognized when I call your name. Jean is going to help us. So the first one is Cooper Joseph Castle. He will be attending University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. Next is Drake Allen George, who will be going to Tennessee College of Applied Technology. All right, our next one is Matthew Bassam Jurgis, and he is going to go to David Lipscomb. All right, and then we have Elijah Hayes Joy going to David Lipscomb. We have Kirsten Michelle Pigg, who's going to Middle Tennessee State University. And then we have Abby Irene Scobie, who is going to University of South Carolina.
All right, now we're going to turn to Julie. She gets our first question. Okay. What is Realtracs doing to comply with the changes required in the NAR settlement?
Okay, so there's three big things. And so I'm going to share them here with you, but the even better news is that you all received an email this morning from Realtracs that tells you these three things with lots of descriptions. So if you have questions about what I share, you can refer to that email. You can always ask me too, but know that you have it in your inbox. So the first thing is we had to change our rules. When you start messing with things like taking compensation out of the MLS, that affects our rules. So we had to change our rules, which changes our participant and user agreement forms. So on August 19th, which is a Monday, before you can get into the system, you will have to agree to the new user and participant agreements or you won't get into the system. So what this means for you who like to read the fine print is that you want to read that before August 19th, or when you need to get in there to do something quickly, you won't be able to. So make sure those documents are linked in the email you got today. There will also be links from our homepage when you log in there. So make sure you have time to review those. We also are taking compensation out of the MLS. That will occur on August 17th, which is a Saturday morning. The two things that you need to do to prepare for that is if you have a document uploaded with a listing that refers to compensation, you need to remove that document. If you have reference to compensation in private remarks, you will need to remove those remarks. Everything else about the system we can handle and take out. And then the third thing is we are providing education about the need for buyer agreements before you tour a home. So when you're in Realtracs and you're scheduling a showing, on the modal where you schedule your showing, you will see a confirmation box about acknowledging that you understand that a buyer agreement is required before you show a home. So those are the three things, the big three things that we're doing in regards to this.
So the big day is August 17th, which is a Saturday. Put that on your calendar. I'm going to go back to you on one other thing. What is the plan for enforcement of the new rules and practices? NAR has said it will rest on the MLS, but we know Realtracs has been working on how to approach the issue. Could you update us on the latest?
This is the fun part. I thought about asking you all how many people y'all thought worked at Realtracs. But if you don't know, we do not have an army of MLS police that just run around checking for things. So we are doing a lot of education on our end to make sure that you guys are educated about what you have to do. But at the end of the day, that's about all we can do. So a lot of the enforcement will come from the market. So just like you have the report a listing option now, when you see incorrect data in a listing, it'll be basically the same thing if you encounter something in the market where someone's doing something wrong. In terms of compensation, we do have stuff inside our system where if you try to skirt around and be sneaky and put compensation in some remarks or somewhere, we will find that. So policing, that's how it will be policed. We do have some pretty strict fines, particularly if you enter compensation in MLS, because that is a legal liability to us that we do not want to deal with. There are new fines and restrictions about not having a buyer agreement set in place, but the big thing is the fines for entering compensation.
Thank you. Addison, if we are to now negotiate buyer compensation within the offer to purchase, what is the proper wording for seller-paid concessions that a buyer can apply towards paying their agent?
I think this is really a twofold question, and to start, I think this question starts if we are now to negotiate it within the purchase and sell agreement. We don't have to negotiate it within the purchase and sell agreement. Even though the field is coming off the MLS, which I admit was a reliable tool, that doesn't change the concept of cooperating compensation. And so Tennessee Realtors does have a compensation agreement now. Continue to use that compensation agreement as you work through your transactions. If you are in a situation where you're representing a buyer and there is no cooperating compensation offered, or maybe the amount is not going to meet what you agreed to with your buyer in that agreement, there is going to be a special stipulation on RF 707 that will be available for use moving forward after August 17th that has that wording where the buyer is asking seller to compensate their broker X amount or X percent at closing. So that language is there for you in special steps if you find yourself needing to go outside of the cooperating compensation agreement.
Okay, if the buyer rep agreement must be a flat fee or percentage and the agreement is signed for say 2%, but the seller of the house they want is offering 3%, is it true that the buyer agent is then not entitled to the extra percentage? Addison.
That is potentially true, yes. As part of the settlement agreement was that a buyer's agent cannot accept more than what is agreed to in writing with the buyer. If you encounter this situation, you can amend your buyer rep agreement if your buyer is willing to sign that. If they are not willing to sign that, then yes, you will be capped at what that amount you agreed to on the front end was. And so that would, in this situation, be the 2%.
Okay, Betty, advertising seller-paid concessions is not new, of course, but with the new seller concessions field on the MLS, what happens when a listing is advertised to pay $10,000 in concessions? I go show the house, we write a full price offer and ask for those $10,000 in concession, then the seller decides to not to agree to the $10,000.
The concessions is not enforceable, okay? That is the negotiation, so we're asking for it. Yes, they're advertising. I know we're gonna be upset about it, but it's there saying the seller's willing to do that, and the seller has the option. If the offer comes in low, they may decide not to. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. I mean, there's a lot of times we have in our realtor remarks that they're willing to give an allowance. But then when we negotiate it out, that allowance is, we kind of look over that, and we've done it with other things, you know, a lower offer or whatever. So no, it's not going to be enforceable.
Okay, Miss Betty, the new buyer representation rule, I think it's a good thing. How will this be policy enforced? I cannot think of how anyone will really know if a realtor has an executed rep agreement wrote prior to showing the property.
Well, I think Julie just kind of addressed that with, you know, they're going to have where you have to put a checkbox on that. I think it's going to be up to the broker mainly. And as brokers, you need to be training your agents that this is just policy. I mean, we really shouldn't be showing property without a buyer's rep, period. passed. We shouldn't be doing that now.
Okay. Addison, if a seller is providing compensation to a buyer's agent, how does the listing agent need to communicate that when asked? Are there ethics, regulations that we need to adhere to?
And so I'll start out with, if you haven't seen the forms video, Cindy Stanton is our forms chair. She and I filmed it a couple of weeks ago. It's on TennesseeRealtors.com under the Forms on the Fly page. And so I think that as I'm going to reference a lot of new documents or new provisions. So go back and watch that there. In our listing agreement, whereas previously it was it did talk about what you would offer in cooperating compensation, but the language moving forward is very clear that a listing agent is authorized to offer X%, X amount to a buyer's agent. So your listing agreement gives you the authority to communicate that to buyer's agents. I don't think that there are any ethics or regulations that are, to my knowledge, very on point to that, except for being truthful. And so if your seller is willing, if you and your seller have agreed to cooperating compensation, absolutely communicate that when asked, and be truthful in representing what that amount is and having those upfront conversations. You have the authority to do so in your listing agreement, and then there is no reason to not be forthcoming in that amount, because then I think you could get in a catch-all ethics or even TREC rule situation for not being truthful to all parties.
Thank you. This will be for Julie. The MLS form, seller's instruction not to disseminate property information through Realtracs, requires that it be signed at the same time as a listing agreement and kept on file with the listing agreement. Number one, what is the purpose of this form? 2, who will police this? 3, where is this to be kept on file with Realtracs? If so, what about
Okay, so this form, excuse me, the purpose of this form is simply, it's kind of like the listing you have that you don't want publicly in the MLS. And so the purpose of it is to comply with the MLS rules. If you have a listing, you have to have it entered in the MLS, but you don't have to share it publicly with the rest of your fellow agents or syndicate it out publicly on any website. So the form allows you to do that. It also allows the seller that you're working with to know that their property is not going to be publicly disseminated anywhere. Policing it, y'all are going to know this so good by the end of the day. It's market police. It's market police. We will verify the paperwork if somebody asks for us, just like with anything else, but it's just basically police in the market. As far as confidentiality, when a listing like this is put into the MLS, it's an incomplete listing. So the only people who have access to see this listing or to see this agreement is Realtracs staff, and it's limited, the staff that can see that, and you yourself as the listing agent and your broker. That's it.
Thank you. Addison, how are brokers supposed to enforce the policy of getting these buyer agreements signed before showing? Are my agents supposed to send me a copy every single time they go show a house?
I think like anything else, that's just a broker policy. That's a decision you make in your office as a broker, and I'm sure there are best practices to adhere to. I certainly would recommend getting copies of everything because, if you are a broker, that the buck kind of stops with you. And so it's just a good way to make sure your agents are complying with the settlement, and then also TREC rules, state law, code of ethics. But that isn't discussed within the settlement or probably even MLS policy. That's just going to be an office policy that you as a broker make.
Addison, several of my agents prefer not to be a facilitator and or have an unrepresented buyer purchase their listing. They have instead referred that buyer to another agent so that buyer can have proper representation and my agent can represent only their listing client. Going forward with the changes, if you have an unrepresented buyer that says that they want to remain unrepresented and take the amount that the seller would have paid to a selling agent as a concession to the buyer's closing costs, is the agent obligated to show the property to this buyer and potentially work with them through the transaction? Keeping in mind that the agent only intends to be the designated agent for the seller and has conveyed that to the listing client on the front end. What is the listing agent obligated to do for the buyer outside of the duties of all customers, such as
I will say this probably isn't a new issue. Nothing in the settlement should have affected any of this scenario. You've probably dealt with unrepresented buyers before who think that by not having an agent, they're going to get the house at a lower price. And so it's the same thing. You do have a duty to all parties under state law, and so I would absolutely show an unrepresented buyer the house. That's in the best interest of your client, the seller. It could also, by saying I'm only going to work with buyers that have agents, that could open up for antitrust suits. It's just really problematic if you go down that road. But know when working with an unrepresented buyer, it's totally okay that they remain unrepresented throughout the transaction. Make sure that's marked on the confirmation of agency form. Make sure you have the working with a real estate professional form signed by them. Make sure it's very clear that your interests are tied to the seller, and that's who you're going to be loyal to throughout the transaction. But while maintaining the duties owed to all customers through it. Again, I think that you can be sued at any time by any person for anything, but just making sure that the buyer knows that you represent the seller, you have all the appropriate paperwork filled out, and just protecting yourself in those situations. But this shouldn't be a new problem for anyone.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone these questions came from our group. They didn't select them, so they have no idea until today. So Betty, I have seen in other markets that they have still been allowed to upload the compensation agreement in the file section. Will that be an option?
No, we will not.
Okay. Advertising seller paid concessions is not new, of course, but with the new seller concessions field on the MLS, what happens when a listing is advertised to pay $10,000 in concessions, show the house, write the full price, and ask for those $10,000 in concession? Then the seller decides not to agree. Sounds repetitive, actually, but anyway.
Yeah, that was a previous question.
Okay, sorry about that. It was a double question. The other question I have, Mark, can they clearly define concessions and what is allowed to be included in this figure?
Yeah, we've done that for years. Concessions can be carpet allowance. I mean, we've put that in realtor remarks in the past, right? So yes, you can do, if somebody's going to do $5,000 in concessions, and then you can write the concessions goes, they're offering it towards carpet.
And I'll add to that too.
Okay.
As part of our new listing agreement, and I don't have the language in front of me, there is a section, it's new, and it's called seller concessions, and the forms committee opted not to put it like a blank or a dollar amount in there, but it is saying the seller is being made aware that buyer may ask for certain concessions. This could include like repairs, as Betty said, or home warranties, or buyer broker compensation. And that's just an effort to let a seller know on the front end. And again, that's nothing new, but just, hey, throughout the transaction, we've talked about sell price, but we haven't talked about these other things that a buyer may ask for throughout the transaction, and I want you to be prepared to answer that question. And then if you do have a seller that says, yeah, I'm totally good to, let's just advertise $20,000 in concessions. That's a conversation you can have with your seller and put that in special steps if they do want to advertise it on the MLS.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So Realtracs added the field, the seller concessions offered field, and it's just a marketing field, essentially. And there's actually two fields. There's a toggle for yes or no. And so if your seller is offering concessions, you can toggle to yes and you can leave it there. You don't have to do anything else. There is currently a field for a dollar amount, not a percentage, just a dollar amount. If you want to enter the amount, you can. You do not have to. Neither of these fields are required. We are getting questions about whether or not we will allow in the MLS the description of what these concessions are for. We are not currently doing that because we're kind of waiting to see what happens with the Department of Justice. They are really coming down on a lot of different MLSs for how they're using and what they're planning to do with their concessions field. California Regional, huge MLS, originally had put a percentage and a dollar amount, and based on things that they were seeing, they've taken that completely out, and they're not putting any other kind of information. It's just basically yes or no. So just wanted to let you all know that if you have questions about whether we're going to do that, we're watching the market to see what happens with whether or not we add that. But for now, it's a yes or no. You can or cannot add the dollar amount, and neither of those fields are required.
Thank you. Addison, where can a buyer's compensation be listed legally?
You know, what we know from the NAR settlement is that it cannot be listed on the MLS. And that's even if you're getting creative, like Julie said before about how you're gonna list on the MLS, it cannot appear there. It can't be a link to a website that just says Addison Russell's offering 3% to all buyer brokers or X%. And Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can do it on your websites, on your Facebook pages, but it just cannot be like a direct link from the MLS. On riders, on yard signs, I've gotten that question a lot. Everything else?
Yeah, she's right. Our basic answer is anywhere but the MLS. Aggregators of compensation, also not great, but basically anywhere else. And like she said, don't be creative. Don't have your lawn guy cut 3% into the grass of the yard of the house that you're listing, because we will ask you to take that photo down. So yeah, but basically anywhere else you can do that. Yes, but you can't have a picture of that sign on the MLS.
Anybody see Monet yesterday? She showed a picture of a sign and it said offering 3% on the little rider of her sign. But like she said, you can't put it in your picture on the MLS. A little different. Let's see. Hold on. Okay. Addison, with the new rules, we will most likely see more buyers going straight to the listing agent. Is that the same question?
I don't think so.
Is that a different one?
Yes, this is a different question.
It's number 20.
Yeah,
Okay.
we haven't gotten there.
With the new rules, we will most likely see more buyers going straight to the listing agent, which will lead to dual agency handling both sides of the transaction. What is the best way, as a broker, to advise the agents to navigate this and be protected legally? Act as a facilitator or act as a dual agent. Some states, dual agency is already illegal. Please advise us on what is by law the best way to represent clients and protect our agents.
Okay, so not the same question, but similar as to what we previously spoke about. In Tennessee, dual agency is legal. However, I'd recommend against it for several reasons. As you can probably imagine, it just gets really messy. And so you can't act as a facilitator. If you represent the seller and a buyer comes to you and wants to work with you with the agreement of both parties, you can become a facilitator, which means you're no longer an agent of the seller. You do have to be careful in those situations about the confidential information you've learned from the seller up to that point. Or, as mentioned before, continue to just represent your seller and have the buyer unrepresented. If you kind of feel like that's the best course of action, you don't know this buyer, they can continue to be unrepresented, or as always, say, hey, there's this great agent in my office. I think that they would do a really good job for you. I'd love to work with them on this transaction. So my top two answers would be try and find them an agent to work with. It's gonna make your life easier, as you probably know. But if not, they're totally fine to remain unrepresented throughout the transaction. And if you do have a relationship with both of them and want to become a facilitator, that's an option. You just have to get both parties to agree to it, and you have to be careful how you walk that line. Dual agency would be the last option.
Okay, thank you. Betty, what if a buyer who we have been showing homes up until this rule change wants to view a home, but now refuses to sign the buyer broker rep form or agree to pay anything? What is the best way to handle this?
Well, one thing, we are going to have an amendment. So if you have a buyer's rep in place, it's already addressing the fact that you have the set amount already in place with your buyer. There is going to be an amendment that's really more of just kind of bringing it back out, that it's negotiable and staying within the NAR compliance. If you're out showing property right now without a buyer's rep, that is a risk you take if a buyer refuses to sign one. So hopefully by then you have shown them your value. Well, they'll be happy to sign that. And there's options with non-exclusive, facilitator, a certain amount. If you want to talk to them about, if they want to see a house, then you charge this amount. We have more options now that we're supposed to discuss.
And Addison, if a seller agrees to compensate a buyer's agent but tells the listing agent special stipulations.
What number is that on here? 23. Hey, that's me. Okay. Let's see. I don't know about the legalities of that. If a seller agrees to compensate a buyer's agent with a listing agent, I don't know about the legalities of not being able to share that, but I don't know why you would want to. What's the purpose of having a seller agree to pay cooperating compensation, but then trying to keep it under wraps? You know, hopefully you've had that conversation about what that means, what that looks like, the value a buyer's broker has, and it's just kind of all worked out in that front conversation. And like I said, the listing agreement gives you the authority to communicate this. And so I don't know that it's illegal. I just don't think that it has any place in a transaction. And I think that you maybe could be opening yourself up to complaints about not being honest to all parties and not being cooperative. So I just would encourage you as a listing agent to have that conversation with your seller. And if they ask you to keep it confidential, just come say, tell me why. What's your reason for that? What do you think we're gonna gain? I don't really think that it's gonna play out how you think it's gonna play out. I think it's gonna cause more problems. It's gonna create a guessing game. And I don't think that this is the best direction to take. And so I would discourage you from kind of continuing in a listing that way. And then the second part of the question was, if so, would you put the amount of compensation requested in the special stipulations? Again, if your buyer is looking for the seller to compensate their broker and it's not being worked out in the compensation agreement, that can be addressed in the purchase and sell agreement. That's something NAR has said on their website, that it's not a violation of standard practice 1616. So certainly the special stipulations are there. Don't get crazy. I encourage you to use your compensation agreement first, but they are there if you're encountering difficult situations, and they're a tool for the buyer and seller to negotiate through.
Thank you. Betty, our website is not linked to the MLS. We are allowed to put the buyer broker offer of compensation on the website, correct? Just nowhere in MLS? Question mark.
Correct. You could put it on the website. You cannot put it anywhere in the MLS, including, and kind of like Julie said again, no attachments, no special language. It's just too risky with the fines.
Addison.
Yes.
How will offers of compensation be communicated? Brokers can't use MLS. Doesn't this just make broker compensation less transparent? That's a question.
Arguably, it does make it less transparent, but you know, we were dealt the cards we were dealt, and so we are working through that. Since they cannot be communicated on the MLS, you're just gonna have to pick up your phone and make a phone call, send a text message. And so if you're a listing agent, answer your phone. It's just gonna save time in the long run. But if I'm a buyer's agent, I call a listing agent and say, hey, my buyer would like to come see this. Are you offering cooperating compensation? They say, yes, we are, X apples. Great, that's awesome. I'm gonna send over a compensation agreement. Go ahead and get that worked out on the front end, and then that's just kind of like how it is now prior to August 17th. It's one less thing the buyer has to worry about and the buyer and seller have to worry about in the transaction. So I just encourage you all to communicate with each other and just ask that question on the front end, because it can make a difference to your buyer as to how much money they need to bring to the closing table, and then maybe that affects what they can pay for the property. But just call your fellow realtors.
Addison?
Yes.
Everything's falling on you.
That's okay.
Do you know if a transaction coordinator or an unlicensed assistant can call an agent to find out commissions?
I actually don't know the answer to this question. That would be enforced by the Real Estate Commission, but in kind of looking at what the definition of a broker is, and that's where you'll find the activities that require a real estate license, I do not think that this would fall under the definition. So my opinion, and this is just my opinion because I'm not the enforcing body on this, is that an unlicensed assistant can make those calls to find that out, that is not the practice of real estate.
Okay, Julie, How is Realtracs maintaining value and relevance as the market changes?
So I don't know if y'all know, but a lot of people think that the MLS may not be quite as valuable without having compensation in it, and we strongly disagree with that, because at the end of the day, our whole purpose is to help promote an efficient real estate marketplace. And in doing that, it's about compiling accurate, relevant data, and it's all in one place. And a lot of that comes from you guys putting in the right data and helping to keep it clean, but also we want to make sure that you have all the tools that help you be efficient and not have to go to 45 different apps or websites to do the things that you need to do to run your business effectively. So we will constantly be making sure that our system is updated to meet market needs. We'll add features, we'll add tools. You know, your feedback is really important. If you've not heard of feedback at realtracs.com, this is where you can go to share all your feedback, good or bad. We take it all in. One of the other things that we're doing is working with like-minded MLSs to create opportunities for you that exist outside the Middle Tennessee marketplace. Last October, we announced our partnership with the Southeast MLS Alliance. That alliance is Realtracs, and then the 3 largest MLSs in North Carolina, Georgia, and Charleston. Those are Canopy and Charlotte, Charleston Regional, and Georgia MLS. And we've been working like a dog trying to get all this information in. If y'all don't know, we're about to import like 1 million something listings from Georgia just to get into our system. And so we're really excited though, because we expect to have all of that data in our system in the next 2 weeks. So you all will, from Realtracs, will be able to search data in Charleston, Charlotte, and Georgia, pretty much all of Georgia. And so that way, if you're working with buyers who are looking for a second home, or you're looking for referrals, or you've got a buyer who doesn't know where they want to go and you're just trying to help them, it opens up opportunities. And so we're working for you in lots of different ways, other than just being a place where compensation used to be listed.
Thank you. Betty, is there a new buyer's agent compensation section in the PSA, or will the buyer's agent compensation need to be added in special steps?
If the seller is compensating the selling agent, then we have added special step language in the 707 form that specifically says seller is paying a compensation of blank as a concession to the buyer. So it's already in the contract. If the seller is paying, if it's a cooperating compensation from the listing agent, then we do business as normal. We have just use your standard comp agreement.
Thank you very much. That is all the questions that we have for them for the moment. Now, Buzz is going to take the mic around, raise your hand for any questions. I'm going to hand over my mic to the girls.
Okay, sure, we have questions. Okay, I'm going to go back to you real quick.
Oh, this is more you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Thanks, Bob. I have a couple of questions, so I'm going to go through them quickly. I noticed some new real estate agreements that we will start compensation, and some compensation can be agreed to for sharing. I know we can't do a negotiable on the buyer's agreement. On the listing agreement, if the seller wants to leave the buyer compensation as negotiable, how do you advise that?
That's a good question. And I think that per the settlement, that would be allowable, because it, like you said, the settlement only talks about the buyer, your agreements with the buyer having an objectively ascertainable amount. So you can certainly put that in there. And maybe what you do is you write a special stip, because I think the blank's like this big, and so it's hard to put it in there. But you can put that as a special stipulation that's, maybe seller is willing to consider buyer broker compensation to be negotiated at the time of contract. I will say it probably make your life easier as a listing agent just to go ahead and get your sellers to agree to something on the front end. It's one less step that the buyer and seller have to worry about throughout the process, and then I just imagine it'll make your life a lot easier. But that's your business decision.
Okay, second, are we giving any thought to discussion with what vendors will allow anything that you throw down as far as seller concession? We're writing in there that compensation is a concession that can be used by the vendor as maximum concession. Let's say it's conventional maximum concession 3%, whereas closing costs, we do a lot of the right concession stipulations
So I think there's some lenders in the room that can probably address that question better than I. It's my understanding that, they're not going to consider compensation as an ITC. And so, but again, I think that that's a lender question that I don't really have.
Maybe that's conversation separately to avoid that. And then lastly, I know when advertising and all that, I can't get a price that a seller lists at home at. Is it advisable to allow the seller to make a price at home at $400,000 last bid, $30 or $25 or $20? I wanted to do that, and the seller chose to do that as a way of explaining what we're offering compensation, but that is that.
Julie, did you catch that?
I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV, but I'm going to tell you that you shouldn't do that. I would tell you to advise your seller not to do that. Only because what's going to happen is, if you do it, somebody else is going to do it, and somebody else is going to do it, and somebody else is going to do it, and then we're going to pick it up in the system, and we're going to have to say, you can't do that. So I would advise your seller not to do that.
All right, I have a question back here.
Will there be a required transparency after settlements in the MLS so that we can see the seller made concessions? And the second part of that question is, if there is, we'll be able to see what was concessions and what was not after a sale is closed.
Can you guys repeat the question so we make sure we get this recorded?
Sure.
Did y'all get that? Or should you
Yeah.
ask that again?
So if I heard you correctly, you're asking if there was going to be any required transparency about concessions in the MLS after the property closes.
Some people enter after the sale is closed, whether there was concessions and no. So it would be nice to see that transparency.
Yeah. So it's going to be a two-part question. Currently, we don't have any plans to make that a required field. What I would tell you is that we listen to the market a lot. So as we move in through these changes, and that's something that you would like to see, feedback at realtracs.com. Like, let us know that you want to see that. As far as the breaking out, I go back to what I said earlier. We're just trying to watch the market and see what the DOJ allows or doesn't seem to allow as far as how far can we go with this. So it's definitely on our radar, and we're watching it.
Hey, anybody else have any questions?
Going to be potential for a simple one-page prior agreement for the show, or always be prior agreement as taken?
This is a really long answer, probably longer than you wanted. I really set out and would have loved to have done a one-pager. And then as I got to including everything I thought in the forms committee that we needed, it was much longer than one page. And then just really posed more questions than answers. So the committee, and Betty can speak for herself as a committee member, but kind of thought, okay, let's put a document out there that will make people that don't want to use agency compliant. And our goal as a committee and staffing the committee was, let's just do kind of the bare minimum to become into compliance. And like Julie said, I think they were very much aware of, we're going to see how this plays out, and kind of the feedback that we get from the realtor community about, what are you needing, or like what are things that are coming up that we didn't think of. And so if that's, as we move through this stage, if that's something you really desire, I encourage you to submit that feedback to Tennessee Realtors. Betty would be a great contact for that, and kind of saying it, the committee is open to seeing what the community needs.
If I can just ask the panelists, please be sure to repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I had one more to ask. First, is it true that we've been told we can't put a value of 3% or a value equal to 3% in concessions when they're not less, otherwise we get fined? Is that true?
Can you, and I think that's a a Julie question, so did you?
So your question is it true that you cannot put the value of 3% in the concessions field? That is not true. Because we don't know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, especially in new construction, that concessions equal what a commission amount might be. And because we don't have any way to say, oh, well, this is for new floors and a new roof, we can't do that. What I will say is much like the question that was asked about, can I put a certain digit at the end of a sales price? Our system will be looking, and if we see that all the amounts, the dollar amounts, look like 2.5%, 3% of a sales price, most likely we will have to take that away, and it'll just be a toggle yes or no for concessions. But if that's what the concession amount is, that's what it is. So yeah. Oh yeah, no. So, yeah, that's a fair question. Yeah, totally fair question.
Anybody else? Any questions?
So then agents that are not realtors are going to have access to the MLS. Will they be held to the same NAR rules of having a buyer's agency agreement and all, other guidelines? Are they going to be held to the same standard? How is that going to be policed?
That's a great question. The question is next year, when non-realtors are allowed to have access to the MLS, will they basically be held to the same standards of a realtor? The short answer to that is yes. We're still working out all the fine print of what that looks like. We're gonna have basically something similar to like a business standards of conduct that are very much about doing ethical business, which is what the Code of Ethics is about. So when it comes to, I don't know what all that looks like yet. We're still in the process of working that out. But yeah, we're not here for any shady characters.
All right, anybody else?
If you use the seller concessions toggle switch, is that just for, or can you check that if you're offering commission, or does it have to be commission and something else in order to use that toggle switch?
Seller concessions cannot be tied to buyer broker compensation. So if you're just offering compensation, then that is not the toggle for you. It is simply for concessions. But if the concessions are $30,000 and part of that's for a new roof and part of that's for buyer broker compensation, you can then feel free to use that. But you can't use it just as a signifier of compensation, no.
All right, anybody else? Still got a little time. Okay. I'll take probably 3 more questions if you have.
One question I have is for the change, is this for residential only or for all classes?
The question was, are these changes for residential only or for all classes? The settlement is only for residential real estate. This is going to be really confusing and probably unnecessary, but in early NAR webinars, they were saying that residential real estate was only, wasn't applying to leases or rentals, even if it was residential. And then I think auctions were a question mark as well. My biggest resource throughout all of this has been facts.realtor, and if you haven't visited it, do. They have a really, 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 really great settlement FAQ, but that question is actually not covered in the settlement FAQ, but I do know it's not commercial. And then again, early on, they were saying it wasn't applying to leases or auctions, but I don't know, Julie, how y'all are interpreting that.
We're interpreting it just like Addison just said.
Second question I have is, are there the prior representation agreements? Commission language could be up to X%, no more than?
The question was, in your buyer rep agreements, can you use language up to X% or no more than X%? No, you can't. It has to be a hard number. Whether that's a hard percentage amount or a hard dollar amount, I did float that question up to NAR because that was something the committee was looking at including. But the settlement says the number has to be objectively ascertainable, and NAR does not feel that up to is objective enough.
And how do you handle bonus commissions?
The question was about bonus commissions. How do you handle those? So the settlement does have a cap on compensation that you cannot accept more than what was agreed to in your written agreement with the buyer. If that looks like cooperating compensation is being offered at X% and then there's a bonus and you add those two numbers up together and it's less than what you agreed to in your buyer rep agreement, then all is well. And your buyer may be on the hook for that difference. If the bonus is going to exceed the amount you agree to in your written agreement, then again, you can go back and amend your agreement with your buyer, but the buyer would have to sign off on that. And if the buyer is unwilling, then that's money you leave behind.
My question is, new construction where the agent is helping another agent with an open house, are there any kind of precautions that they need to take or have to sign in or something like that for open houses to make sure you're protected? Because buyers are coming through there as well.
So the question was about open houses and kind of how to handle them. And this is probably the number one question I've received from the hotline. And so also another resource for you if you have any questions that aren't covered on facts.realtor. It may be form specific. Email the hotline at TennesseeRealtors.com. But this is the number one question I've been getting is how to handle open houses. And so if you are working with the seller and you're hosting an open house, you do not need written agreements with buyers that come through the door. NAR has been very clear that these written agreements are only required when you're working with the buyer. And that does not include if you're showing your own listing or if you're showing an open house. If you are hosting an open house for someone else, this isn't talked about in the settlement, but my recommendation would be having something in writing with the seller that triggers that you are now working with the seller. Whether that's amending your designated agency agreements and adding a designated agent on, even for that day, then at that point that agent is working with the seller and does not need a written agreement with any buyers that come through, or just some other form in writing that you are working with the seller there in that situation.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Does anybody else? We'll have one more after this.
Keep hearing about where you can negotiate to accept more. So would you, let's say you estimate higher on the buyer agreement, you enter the negotiation, the amount being offered is less. You then do an amendment to modify that higher agreement?
The question was, we've talked about if, a seller listing agent is offering more than what was agreed to in your buyer rep agreement, how to handle that. But what happens if a listing agent is offering less in cooperating compensation or a seller is offering less in compensation than what you agreed to with your buyer? Can you go back and amend your buyer rep agreement or the agreement with your buyer at that time? Yes. If you're getting X% from a listing agent and you feel that maybe based on the services you've provided that's sufficient, you can amend your buyer rep agreement to where they would not have to pay the difference to you at closing and what you earlier agreed to. That's an option. The question was if you are showing a listing and they're offering, the forms committee, we're notorious for talking in apples and not percentage, but if they're offering 1 apple and your buyer has agreed, you and your buyer agree that your services are worth 3 apples, do you need to disclose to your buyer in your agreements that can be negotiated through the purchase and sell agreement? I think that's a really good question, but your buyer will know that when you go in to write the offer. And that's one thing that the standard of practice 1616 does talk about as a Realtor member, you cannot use the purchase and sale agreement to unilaterally change your compensation. So it has to be, you have to have a conversation with your buyer, like, hey, I just got off the phone with the listing agent. They're gonna give me 1 apple. Per our agreement, you're gonna owe me 2. A tool available to you is that we can talk about this in our special SIPs when you write your offer, or maybe you wanna come lower on your offer price. But that's a conversation you have with your buyer, and that your buyer, and it's your buyer's decision to ask for that money based on their financial situation. I think our buyer rep agreements do say that you're going to negotiate with that you have the authority to negotiate with the listing agent or seller for that amount. But if the buyer is going to include it in their purchase and sale agreement, they should know that. That's a conversation you're having before they put it in writing. If that answers your question. Okay. I think that is really fair feedback. You said that, maybe if we're not having that conversation on the front end with our buyer, you could change how they go through the process. And so I think that's feedback Betty and I are happy to take back to the forms committee and to kind of see how we can, because the whole point is to be transparent with consumers always. And so how we can be more transparent with consumers.
Okay, I didn't see a hand go. We're going to do one more question. As bonus, this is it. No double bonus, no trip, no wings. Here you go, Jason.
This is just a follow-up back to your previous question. If I have a buyer broker agreement for 3%, let's say that's what everyone knows, and somebody comes back and says, they're only offering 2.5%, are you saying at that point that we should amend that to that agreement, or is that just something that could be agreed on between the buyer and me to say I'm willing to work for 2.5 even though my paperwork says 3?
So his question was kind of a follow-up to a previous question we talked about, that if your agreement says, with your buyer says X% and a listing agent is offering a little less than that, at what point do you amend your buyer rep agreement, or do you just come to an agreement that you're willing to work for the lesser percentage? My recommendation would be to get a contract executed in that situation between the buyer and seller and have them go. And you can talk to the buyer about that too, of hey, well, okay, I've changed my answer. Thank you for this on the spot question. I would amend my buyer rep agreement after that conversation and say, I just want to let you know that I've really enjoyed working with you. You haven't been a pain in my rear end, so I'm willing to take the lesser percentage to make this home work for you. Let's go ahead and amend our buyer rep agreement, and then that way you can feel confident going into this purchase and sale agreement with the seller that will be more money you have to come up with a closing table to pay me. And so that's how I would handle that. Now, if that contract doesn't fall through, that's, again, this is a business decision you're making that's probably going to get harder to get the buyer to agree to come back up, because you've already kind of said, my services, I'm willing to work for less, but that's a decision you make and you'll make with each buyer.
To the property.
The question is, can you put it specifically to the property? Yes, you could. You could get creative there. What? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that, actually. I don't know. I'm going to see if I can find that somewhere via NAR, because they've kind of been sticklers for how that number looks and what that number looks like. So will you email the hotline, and I will do some research and try and provide that to you. His question was about using our other, if you have a buyer rep agreement, using the newly revised RF 143, which is kind of a non-exclusive. agency agreement or can operate as a facilitator agreement. If you have a buyer rep agreement, stick with your buyer rep agreement. Don't incorporate more documents. It'll make your life more difficult. It'll be more confusing to the buyer. Stick with that one agreement and amend that as you need, and then I will look into if you can do it property specific or not.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adams, Julie, Addison, Betty. Thank you, everyone. She's our EMTAR president-elect. She's got some announcements to make.
Hello, how are y'all doing? That's a deep subject, but I think we're gonna go online. I'm just throw it out there, show you value, talk to them. To me, that's what it's all about. Let's have conversations. I'm a talker, so it's okay. It'll work out. All right, announcements. Just so you know, this session is being recorded, so those who could not make it here today will have the opportunity to review it at any time. Once we have the video edited and ready for streaming, we will let our membership know. So be on the lookout for that for those, if anybody like that. In the meantime, I'm going to make a couple of other announcements. So I want to say thank you to all those who brought school supply. The Community Involvement Committee, that school supplies are for Wilson County School Resource Center and Lebanon City Schools Resource Center. So thank you. If you would still like to get something in, you're welcome to drop by the EMTAR office this afternoon, and we will be taking those over there. So thank you again to everybody that brought them. And then, all right, and then managing brokers. You all, I know Anita mentioned this, but we're going to mention it again. There is a meeting on September 18th. Let's try not to. Okay, September 18th. So we decided, I know during the committee, that would be a good month after sort of everything took effect. So that is for you all to come together, talk about what's going on and how everybody's doing at that point.
Is that during the forms
We would love to have city brokers there as possible. We will let you know about the actual venue because so far we already have quite a few signed up. So it will probably not be at the EMTAR office. But we will let you know that for sure. So be on the lookout for an email about that. Also, all of you managing brokers that are here today should have received the latest revision of the Manual of Tennessee Real Estate upon check-in today. If you did not, see your seat or bottom. I'm sure they can help you all with that. And EMTAR Fashion Show, Casa de Moda. So just so you all know, that is coming up October 3rd at Tucker's Gate. So tables should be opening up next week one day. So if you be on the lookout for any of that. Y'all, that is the Community Involvement Committee, and that all the money raised goes directly to CASA. And raise your hand if you know what CASA is. Well, there's quite a few of you. I will say that it stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Kids. So when kids are going through, like parents are divorcing, or they've been through, like, been taken away from their parents, there is a volunteer, a very trained volunteer that is assigned to that child to advocate for that child in court. Like, what is best for the child? So it is a wonderful program. It is an absolutely wonderful organization. And so we would love to have as many people there because it's a lot of fun. Men, it's not just about women. We promise. It is a lot of fun. You're welcome to come. This year's theme is Wizard of Oz. So we decided to do a theme this year. So tables and all of that good stuff please let one of us know. And I think it's on to you, Michael.
Thank you, Gina. I get the pleasure of doing the fun part. Raise your hand if you're affiliated with us. We really appreciate you all being here, learning about all these changes, and being a part of what we do. I've got several gifts to hand out. Did any other affiliates that came later bring anything? I want to make sure I don't get it messed up. No? Okay. I'm going to start off. Betty, will you draw a name? We are going to give 3 gifts. The very first one is going to be from, I believe this is Stuart Tyler with Tracy Truckhouse. So and that name is going to be Jim Wood. And our third is, this is heavy.
It's on the back. It's on the back.
Pine Tree with Homeowners in America. And this is a Moyer Berry. Congratulations. And we also want to really thank our affiliates. So we even got several made up for them as well. And the first one is actually Tracy Truckhouse. I'll let you all pick.
Oh, these are sticky. There we go.
And John Ricky also was John Ricky with Domestic Mortgage.
One
All
more.
right. Yep, another one. And this is John Ricky. Jim Bay. That's it. All right. Oh, we do have one more. All right.
Okay.
Joe McAfee. Thank you all.
I want to make a comment, panelists have a little bit of review on the table. So thank you